This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Upgrade your business with Shopify, home of the #1 checkout on the planet. Shop Pay boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning fewer carts going abandoned and more sales going cha-ching. So if you're into growing your business, get a commerce platform that's ready to sell wherever your customers are. Visit Shopify.com to upgrade your selling today.
It's More Money with leading economist Steve Moore.
Stephen Moore is with us, economist.
With more than 30 years experience as an economist and as a leading thinker of government on business, showing deep understanding of the shifts in the global economy. He's leading economist Steve Moore with More Money on Talk Radio 77 WABC. Now, here's your host, Steve Moore.
Good afternoon, folks. This is the More Money Show on WABC. I am your host, Steve Moore, economist. I am a co-founder of the group Unleash Prosperity. I hope that everybody will get our daily newsletter. Just go to unleashprosperity.com and you can get that for free. It costs you absolutely nothing. So there's no reason not to get it. And if you want to be the smartest person in the room, go to unleashprosperity.com, get our free daily update about what's going on with the economy, what's going on with politics, what's going on with finance. This is a show where we try to make more money for you. And so I'm very appreciative of our loyal audience. We have a great ratings now. We're one of the top Saturday afternoon shows in America right now. And I'm very thrilled to be able to follow on this radio show and other affiliates the great Larry Kudlow, one of my great friends and someone who has been a real mentor to me. So I've learned so much from Larry Kudlow and Arthur Laffer and so many other great economists. By the way, I was telling my kids the other day that I knew Milton Friedman, and they thought that was so cool that I had met Milton Friedman, who was, probably the most important economist of the last 100 years. And Milton Friedman was one of these guys he was only like about 5'4". He was a tiny guy. He and his beautiful, wonderful wife, Rose Friedman, she was also tiny, and they were married, I think, for 50 years together, and wonderful people who came from the University of Chicago. And of course, for those who you don't know Milton Friedman, you're probably listening to the wrong radio show if you've never heard of Milton Friedman. But Milton wrote a very famous book called Free to Choose. He also wrote one of my favorite books. And if you want your kids to understand economics, get this book called Capitalism and Freedom that Milton Friedman wrote back in the 1950s, I think. And so anyway, I've been so blessed in my life to have met so many incredible people like Milton Friedman and to have worked for Ronald Reagan and Donald Trump. I mean, I pinch myself sometimes. I mean, I'm not saying this to boast, folks. I'm saying it because I feel like, wow, God is smiling on me to have allowed me to work for some of the great minds and great change agents of our era. And we have one coming in again in about, I don't know, what is this, about 9-10 days. We will have our new president. This is taking too long. It seems like Donald J. Trump is already president. Joe Biden, Lord knows where he is. He's having a hard time getting out two intelligible sentences in the same speech. But Trump is pressing all the right buttons. He is, I like his new temperament, folks. I like the fact that he's calm, cool, collected. He's not doing name calling. He is not, wild with his antics. He's just basically telling the American people, this is where it's at. This is how it is. And in a very factual way. And he has solutions that will put America first, including the production of American energy, the better trade deals for America, the deregulation of our economy. By the way, one of these regulations he has got to get rid of right away. And on the first hour that he is after inauguration, when he takes the oath of office, is to get rid of this crazy new thing that Biden's talking about, where he wants to get rid of gas heaters. He doesn't want gas stoves. He doesn't want air conditioners. He doesn't want gas stoves. He doesn't want to have lawnmowers. I mean, these people are nuts. I mean, they're Looney Tunes. And so Trump should just tell Joe Biden, no, we're going to repeal that regulation on day one. I also want to have him repeal this crazy idea that we're going to take millions and millions of acres of our offshore drilling off of offline. I mean, come on. We have so much oil and gas in for example, the Gulf of Mexico. Oops, not the Gulf of Mexico. It's now the Gulf of America. I don't know if that's official yet, but that's so Trumpian to call it the Gulf of America. But we have enormous amounts of energy that we could be pumping from places like the Gulf Coast, and we should be doing that so that we don't have to import oil from Russia and from OPEC and from Iran and countries that are trying to kill us. I mean, this is just simple logic, but we've been living in a logic-free zone for the last 3 years and 11 months under Joe Biden's reign of idiocy. And so I'm glad to see. I'm super excited. I got a chill down my spine right now about the idea that this new president is going to come in. He understands that he's only got, realistically, maybe 18 months or 2 years to get as much possible done as he can. He cannot run for re-election. So he's starting out essentially as a lame duck, but he understands that. And he has an incredibly ambitious and aggressive agenda. I don't agree with everything Trump wants to do. I'm not wild about the idea of, what he's talking about, maybe, trying to annex Canada as the 51st state. But it is amazing to me how quickly, it was just within weeks that he had his stand down with Justin Trudeau, the prime minister of Canada. And now Trudeau is gone. He's out of there. He is out. And I predicted this on my show that we were going to see these arrogant leaders all over the world chased out of office, and that's clearly what happened here. Trudeau had a 23% approval rating, and you cannot govern a nation when 4 out of 5 of the electorate hates your guts, and that's what had happened with Trudeau because he so mismanaged things. But this is a new beginning for America. This is morning in America. It's going to take some time. I don't want people to get too euphoric because it will take a while for Trump's policies to take hold. And what concerns me is that Biden is setting all these booby traps. He is not acting like a patriotic American, and I don't like to usually question people's patriotism, but when he's starting to say, oh, we're going to put in place all of these laws that are completely contrary to what the voters just voted for and defying Trump to get rid of them, I just think that's anti-American. I really do. And I think that he's doing it just because he is sour grapes. I think he is envious of Trump. Trump has an approval rating that's much, much, much higher than Biden's is. I saw the other day Biden said, well, gee, if they hadn't gotten rid of me, I would have won the election. He would not have won the election. He would have lost by even more than Kamala has. And Kamala was a pretty horrible candidate. Americans wanted change. They were concerned about the illegal immigration problem. We were concerned about declining incomes. We were concerned about the issue with respect to the cost of everything from food and groceries and medical care and everything. Remember when they called it the Affordable Care Act? I don't think that anybody who's been to a hospital or any kind of medical procedure lately knows that it is not very affordable. And so we have this new beginning, and it is so exciting. And my advice to Trump is go, go, go. Don't wait. This is not the time for the timid. Either help Trump or get out of the way. That's what I say to Congress. Get out of the way. He's got the public behind him. Right now, he has, according to the Gallup poll, he has a more than 51% approval rating, which isn't a great number, but for Trump, it's a great number. And he's got only a 38% disapproval rating. So he's plus 13. That's the highest he has ever had. So the American people, he's got a big wave of goodwill behind him. And look, I know there are many of you listening to the show don't care for Trump, and I respect you. I respect all of our listeners. Everybody has different opinions. But what I'm saying is that he has this political capital that he should use. Use it, Mr. President, when you have it, which is right now, because who knows what the world's going to look like 6 months from now. Make the Trump tax cuts permanent. Get rid of the regulations. Move forward with the trade deals. Get tough with China. Get out of the Paris Climate Accord, all these crazy international treaties that are not in America's interest. And if you do that, Mr. President, then I think we can see an incredible economic revival. You're seeing this with investment. People are excited about the direction of the country. And the fact is that Trump has it in him. I got to tell you, folks, two things about Donald Trump, because I know him personally. I've gotten to know him pretty well over the last 8 years. Number one, love him or hate him, he's one of the hardest working people I've ever met. The guy goes 18 hours a day, sometimes 20 hours a day. I've seen him up at 5 a.m. I've seen him up till midnight. I don't know how he does it with all the stress related to running the greatest country on earth, but he does it. And he soldiers through, and I've never seen him weary or tired, or he has an incredible stamina. That's number one. Number two, the second thing you have to understand about Donald Trump is he is a master negotiator. So all of this stuff about, we're going to take over the Panama Canal and we're going to take over Greenland and all these things, like, I don't think he literally means that. I think what he's sending as a message to Panama, hey, our ships should have right of way in the Panama Canal before the Chinese ships. After all, we built the damn thing. It was American lives and American capital and American know-how that made that canal possible. So how in the world should China have greater access? Why would their ships get to go through the canal before our ships do? I mean, that just seems completely unfair, and that will not stand, and it ain't going to happen anymore because Trump is going to bring an end to that kind of inequity. But the other thing about Trump is that when he gives his speech, which is in 1 week, I hope that he is magnanimous. I hope he sets a vision that is not one of division, but of unity. And I know some of you may roll your eyes because you heard this from Joe Biden. Remember, Joe Biden said, you remember this? He said, I'm going to unify the country. That's what USA Today said. That's what the New York Times said. Finally, we have a unifier. And yet here we are, Joe Biden leaving office in a week. And I can't think of one thing that Joe Biden did. I can't think of one that unified our country. Everything was to placate the far left wing of the Democratic Party, whether it was a $7 trillion spending bill, whether it was the complete catastrophe of the withdrawal from Afghanistan, whether it was the inflation that went up and up and up and up, whether it was these green energy policies that really caused hardship for Americans and reduced our ability to control the world's energy markets, whether it was the loss of control of our border. All of these things were exactly the wrong thing to do. And so, no, I'm sorry, I'm not going to say wonderful things about Joe Biden, even though he's leaving office in a week. I think he was a terrible president. I think he bankrupted our country. I think we are going to, unfortunately, have to spend literally decades of undoing the damage that he did to our balance sheet in this country. And that is very troubling to me. But the good news is the sun is shining. It is morning in America. It's coming in 7 days. I am so darn excited. I can barely stand it. And just watching the clock tick until that wonderful day, which will be January 20. And I think he is sworn in at noon. And we have a new era for America. And I know you're excited, because if you weren't excited, you wouldn't be listening to the show. We'll be right back, folks. This is the More Money Show on WABC.
This is More Money with economist Steve Moore. Now, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show on WABC. Thanks again so much for joining. My next guest is Peter St. Onge, who was a former colleague of mine at the Heritage Foundation for many years, one of the top economists in the country, and is also an expert on something that I don't fully understand, and I think a lot of my listeners don't completely understand, which is what is happening with cryptocurrencies. So, Peter, first of all, thanks so much for joining this afternoon.
Thank you for having me on. That was a very kind introduction.
Well, you are one of the experts on this, and we hope that you can explain the whole crypto issue with our listeners, because we have a president coming in named Donald J. Trump, who really came out strongly in favor of cryptocurrencies. Do you think, Peter, that Trump has it right?
Yeah, that was a big deal, I think, for a lot of the community. There are very few politicians in the world who understand crypto. There are very few economists in the world who understand crypto. Basically, anybody over the age of 50 is going to have trouble with it.
That's my problem, Peter. I'm 64, so I don't understand this stuff. They never taught me any about this in high school or college. So
absolutely.
So Trump is basically saying he believes that cryptos are a positive force for the universe, and I guess you agree with that.
I do, and I think there's a big distinction between. So there's one cryptocurrency called Bitcoin, and then there's thousands of other ones that are often called crypto. And I think that they're a little bit distinct. So Bitcoin is essentially digital gold. It was designed by a programmer who was in love with gold, thought that gold should absolutely replace paper money, and he designed an asset that perfectly mimics gold. It's mined. It's a bearer asset, meaning that, you don't need a bank in order to own it. You can essentially carry it around in your pocket. The government cannot print it. Right. So Bitcoin is exciting for a lot of people because it is sort of a digital version of gold. Right. It's gold that you can email. You don't actually have to send coins. And then there's a separate
hold on. Time out. Because I want to ask you something related to that. So you say it's like gold, but if you look at what's happened to for example, the price of and value of Bitcoin, it's gone up a lot more than the value of gold.
Yeah, so both gold and Bitcoin have a funny characteristic, which is that a lot of the value of both of them is essentially speculation that they could become the dominant money someday.
I see. Right.
So if you compare gold to other metals that have similar supply dynamics, similar scarcity, gold has about a 10x multiple on those other metals, which it's kind of mysterious until you consider that, well, there's, gold is sort of the standing alternative. When the Fed screws up, when central banking screws up, we'll go to gold. And so the question is, so if gold were to do that, it would be worth many millions of dollars. And so if there's a 1% chance of that happening, then the price of gold becomes not $200, which it would if it were just an industrial metal. Rather, it goes to whatever it is now, $2,500. So Bitcoin is very similar. But because Bitcoin is such a smaller asset, there are fewer people who own it. Starts off at a lower price.
I see.
Because of that, any movement, right? So if there's a 1% chance that Bitcoin could become the money someday, and if that goes to 2%, well, then it doubles. Right? It goes up massively because almost really the entire value of Bitcoin is a speculation that eventually fiat money will screw it up. At which point you have the final boss battle between gold and Bitcoin, and then it's sort of a bet on which of those two is going to win. When that occurs, be it 20 or 50 years in the future.
So a question I have for you that I know I get asked a lot by my listeners is, that Bitcoin is, quote, a risky asset and that it could crash. And it could be like the, what happened in the real estate crisis, back in 2000 when all of a sudden these asset values just crashed. Could that happen with Bitcoin?
Without a doubt, it absolutely could. In terms of price, Bitcoin is like if gold and a .com had a baby, it would be Bitcoin. So it moves massively to the upside, massively to the downside. If you don't own Bitcoin, spend a lot of time getting to understand it before you buy, because otherwise you'll buy and then you'll sell at the wrong time. So yes, I get questions from viewers as well, and they ask, should I take out a HELOC on my home and buy Bitcoin? I say no.
You say no.
Don't do that.
Would you say, Peter, that let's say you have a diversified portfolio? Would it make sense for people with who are want a safe portfolio for their retirement? Would it make sense for them to own some Bitcoin?
There, I think it absolutely would. Bitcoin over the past 10 plus years has had about 50% appreciation per year. There have been a couple of very bad years in there, but there have been a lot more really good years. So something like a 2 or 5% allocation, you're sort of buying a lottery ticket. You're also getting a hedge against inflation. So, of course you can do that with gold, but gold doesn't typically move that much. It actually moves less than stocks. So, especially if you're looking to hedge inflation, if you have a mixture of gold, which is sort of your ballast, and then Bitcoin, which is sort of your party asset, you put those together, then you've got a nice hedge on inflation that actually combined would outperform stocks.
And so one of the things I've always said, one of the reasons I've liked cryptocurrencies, even though I don't really own much, is because I think they do serve as a value of almost, as you just said, a hedge against central bankers, trying to inflate currencies to allow more and more government spending and government growth. And I'm not so sure that this bout of inflation that we had under Biden is over. And so if you think inflation is a potential problem in the future, what you're saying is that gold and Bitcoin and other cryptos could be a hedge against that.
Gold and Bitcoin for sure. What you're betting on there is the idea that governments will keep inflating. And that's one heck of a one-sided bet. That's a very, very safe bet. I feel confident recommending that bet. I think you're right that we haven't seen the end of the inflation during COVID. They printed up about 50% of all the money in existence before COVID. They did that over about a 2-year period. I don't think we've seen the end of that. We haven't seen as much bank lending as you normally see, and bank lending multiplies out the money. So if we have a boom under Trump, which I think is likely, we could actually get higher inflation, not because of everything he did, but because there's this money sort of salted away that the banks are still sitting on, not lending out. If the economy looks like it's going positive, that money's going to flood out, at which point you have too much money chasing too few goods. Now, I will mention, though, that I think the rest of crypto, it's interesting, but it's very, very different. So other crypto like Ethereum or Ripple or things like that, these are more utility coins. So think of these more like the app on your phone, right? You have hundreds of apps on your phone. Some of them, see how many steps you took in the day. Some of them check your stocks. The other crypto are good for those. They're interesting. Some of them are interesting. They're extraordinarily risky. Those are not bets that have anything to do with inflation. I think it's fine that they exist, but they are very, very different than Bitcoin, which is meant to be only a digital gold.
So you're saying that Bitcoin is kind of in a category of its own, and the rest are in a different category of risk,
right?
Okay.
Yeah. Exactly.
Now, by the way, I'm speaking to Peter St. Onge, who is a former colleague of mine at the Heritage Foundation, an ace economist who is an expert on the federal budget, on debt, and on these alternative currencies. Are there any of these alternative currencies beside Bitcoin that you might recommend?
What's tricky is that you've got sort of two parts of the question. One of them is would I recommend using them? And there are a number of them are interesting. Ethereum, for example, it's had a lot of growing pains, but the general idea is that it's this sort of network where all of these other apps can play on top of it. So some people have called it a world computer. It's fascinating as an application. It could be worth buying a little bit just to play with and sort of understand how it works. The other question, though, is whether you should invest in them. If you're 23 years old and you have no family and you enjoy playing the lottery, then by all means buy Fartcoin. Other than that, I would not touch them. Like if you actually need that money for anything in the future, I'd probably stay away.
So I'm talking to Peter St. Onge. By the way, Peter, you have a massive following on social media, and I see your videos all the time. How do people access those videos and your messaging and your social media platforms?
Yeah, so I make daily videos on economics and freedom. Those go up on X. It was thanks to Elon that I started making them. I was sort of holding back, expecting to get canceled. So a big thanks to Elon if he's listening.
Well, that's fantastic because I do love those videos, and I would really encourage people to watch them if you want to understand economics. Now, in just our last few minutes, Peter, you had a video recently about this exploding national debt and what the implications are to our country's financial health. Can you, I know this is a big question to answer in just a few minutes, but how big of a problem is it?
It is debated within economics where the red line is. For a long time, it was thought that the red line was about 125% of GDP. We blew right past that.
Right.
So at this point, we are sort of Wile E. Coyote over the cliff. And, on the one hand,
I'm not sure I like that metaphor. That doesn't sound too promising.
So, on the one hand, you don't want to predict disaster next Tuesday because a lot of people do that for a living. But on the other hand, it was wide consensus until very recently that this is the red zone, and we are now here. So a lot's going to depend, I think, on how quickly Trump can get the economy growing. First time around, he did an amazing job. I think the biggest question is how much are they hiding, whether it's cooking the books or playing with the numbers, or Janet Yellen futzing around with short-term debt. How much of the crisis have they sort of sugarcoated until the election was passed, and then they're going to hand all that to Trump? So I think it's a relatively dangerous time right now,
right?
In terms of the debt.
I agree. So last question before I let you go. And this is a question I get asked almost every week from my listeners, and I don't have a very satisfactory answer to the question. And I think you're much more knowledgeable about this than I am. A lot of our listeners are very concerned about something called a digital dollar. And I don't even quite know what the digital dollar means, but can you explain that to people? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Is it coming?
Yeah, so that's the term they use for a central bank digital currency, a CBDC. And a CBDC is basically a cryptocurrency where the government owns it, they run it, they can see everything you're doing with it, they can block any transaction, they can stop you from buying guns, they can stop you from donating, to people they don't like, they can stop you from buying
the wrong kinds of food. Hold on. I want to make sure. So you're saying if I have this digital currency account, and I go out and buy some things, maybe a gun or maybe a house or maybe, one thing or another, you're saying the government would be able to track what I'm buying. Exactly.
And China's already built this, and they've bragged about all the features, and those are precisely the features. Now, of course, nobody would use this. You'd have to be crazy. Why would you want the government to see everything you're doing and have control over it? And so the CBDC is where they impose that on you. And this is a move.
Wait, what is the CBDC? What is that?
So a CBDC is that cryptocurrency. It functions a lot like Bitcoin. When you're using it, you wouldn't actually be able to see it. Like it would, it would feel like using Cash App or Venmo or something, or just using your bank account like normal. So you wouldn't be able to see it. It would be happening underneath on the rails. And the rails, instead of working on a traditional database like your bank works, it would be on this. It's called a digital ledger. It's just a different version of a database that cryptocurrencies work on. But the reason why that ledger is interesting is that it allows whoever's administering it to see everything, right? So your bank, generally you have to give them permission to do a lot of things, right? They can't just sit there and sort of peruse your account activity and then block things. But if the government is running it with this crypto architecture, then they can do that. So they can literally go in. China has, shown that they can do this, block any transaction. And so the question with the CBDC is that there are a number of governments now who are trying to push this. Governments like Thailand, Britain, dozens of countries that are pushing this. And, of course, they say it's to combat tax evasion. That's always what they say. Whenever they want a surveillance power over you, right, they're going to talk about that. But we saw what happens with that sort of thing in Canada a couple of years ago, right, when they had the truckers there. And the Canadian government, I don't think Canadians even realize that the Canadian government could just call up the banks and say, hey, we're going to give you a list of people based on cell phone surveillance, and then we need you to block their accounts completely. Those people could not pay their mortgages. The protesters in Ottawa, right, they were literally going to lose their house. So now if you convert that, right, which only happens with bank money, they could still run around with dollars in their pocket and they could buy lunch. But if you convert the dollar into a CBDC, you now have that level of control on every single dollar in existence.
Wow. So what you're saying then, just sorry to cut you off, but we're up against a hard limit. But what you're saying then is that this could be, I'm a civil libertarian, as I think you are, so that this idea of the digital dollar is something we should be concerned about.
Massively concerned about. And most Republicans have been fighting it. Ron DeSantis was front and center. Trump has promised in his big Bitcoin speech, he said that we will absolutely not have a CBDC.
Oh, good.
The Federal Reserve is exploring it and building sort of playbox or sandbox versions of it. That needs to be shut down. We need legislation saying that we will never have a digital dollar.
I like it. Okay. That is Peter St. Onge, and he is one of the top kind of money guys around. Peter, I can't thank you enough for taking some time off on this Saturday afternoon to chat with us. I guess the bottom line, I think, of what Peter is telling us, folks, is we have to fight against the digital currency, the digital dollar. It is going to invade our privacy. I think it is a dangerous thing to give government all this power. And so we're going to try to stop that from happening. This is the More Money Show on WABC.
It's More Money with leading economist Steve Moore. Now, here's your host, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show. My next guest is one of the top economists in the country. He ran the World Bank during Donald Trump's first term in office. He has been in the financial markets. He is one of the go-to guys if you want to understand what's happening with money, with inflation, with taxes, and, of course, with economic growth, which we don't have enough of in this country. David, thanks so much for joining this afternoon.
Hi, Steve. Happy to.
So I've got so much I want to cover with you, David. You had an excellent piece in the Wall Street Journal, a week or two ago about the debt limit. And you were saying that what we need is safeguards to stop. And I want you to explain to my listeners what you meant. You said we have to have like these guardrails to make sure that the government spending does not, gallop out of control as it has. So what are you suggesting? This was a piece you had in the Wall Street Journal about 7 to 10 days ago.
Yeah. So what the government, I think, is out of control right now. We need to separate the spending from the taxes. It already collects huge amounts of taxes. So the question is, how do you get at spending? Right now, there are really no constraints on how much they spend. They talk about.
Well, by the way, we used to have we had like something called the Budget Control Act a few years ago, which I was a big fan of. It did set some ceilings on spending, and then Congress got rid of it.
Yes, and that's because it wasn't permanent, and we don't really have any permanent restraint. If you go back to the Constitution, it should have a clause in there that says the people need to be protected from an overly big government. But they didn't at the time, and we've never really remedied that. So what we end up with is this debt limit that doesn't work right now. It says, they get to spend all the money they want, and then after the fact, if they don't pay for it, we default on the national debt. It's really dumb. And President Trump was exactly right in saying that at the end of the year. He looked at it and said, the Democrats have spent all this money, and now they won't clear the debt limit, and so it's threatening a default. So
I think that's unfair. I think it's unfair for Trump to walk into the Oval Office and then have this enormous debt that was run up by Biden, and then have to be. I agree with you entirely on that. Now, what kind of spending reforms are you suggesting?
The first point I want to make is that the current debt limit doesn't protect us, so we need a new one. And once you make that leap, then you get a different dynamic. Rather than having one of these deals like the one you were talking about, which is temporary and in the end doesn't actually restrain government very much, we need something that's a more permanent barrier to overspending government. And if you accept that, then we can talk about what are the terms. One would be you could do it in terms of spending 24% of GDP and no more than that, except in time of war. That would be one formulation. I've suggested the easy way to do it is when the debt to GDP ratio is above 100%, then you make it harder for them to spend new money.
How?
Well, you can say that they have to have a higher percentage vote, or you can say that they can't get raises until they identify spending cuts. You can give the president more authority, impoundment authority and rescission authority when you're over the debt limit. That way it's acceptable to Congress. It's when they throw their hands up and say, we're out of control and we can't do anything about ourselves, then give the president some power to choose which spending not to do. Richard Nixon had that, and all previous presidents did, but the Democrats took it away in 1974.
So I like your idea, except there's one thing I don't like about it, David. You say a 24% cap. Historically, the government almost never spent more than 20% of our GDP, except during times of war. So I think you're maybe giving them too much money to spend.
Good. Exactly. So let's have a debate and say 21% and then collect votes in Congress. But what you have to start with is the idea that the current debt limit is really bad for fiscal conservatives because it pretends it's a fake limit, and that gives Democrats all the coverage to keep spending wildly. That Ronald
and it
Reagan
seems like
faced,
yeah.
I
was just going to say that it seems like you and I have been involved in these fights since the Reagan years, and no matter whether it's a Republican Congress and a Democratic president or a Republican president, a Democratic Congress, or whatever the configuration is, it seems like Republicans always get blamed for the debt ceiling.
That's right, because they're the ones that want to be responsible, but they're stuck with this bad law. So that's the real critical thing. And we should start right now, tomorrow, debating, just like you and I are, over should it be 21% or what are the penalties that you could put on Washington? You saw President Biden yesterday was trying to do 2 new monuments. One way to do it is to say Washington may not propose new monuments while we're above the debt limit. And that would, light a fire under them to do something about this. And a critical point here is the markets, financial markets need this kind of stability. You see bond yields going up right now. One reason is because the whole world can see that the U.S. government spending is out of control.
So I'm talking to David Malpass, who's one of the top economists in the country, if not the world. He, in fact, ran the World Bank when Donald Trump was president, did an excellent job. So you know what's going on around the world with the economies just about as well as anyone I could possibly imagine, David. And I want to run something by you because I wrote a piece a few weeks ago saying that I thought this kind of Trumpism revolution that we've seen in the United States and the power to the people movement, I had anticipated that this kind of thing might happen all over the world. You might see it in Canada, you might see it in Britain, you might see it in Germany and France and Japan and Korea and in South American countries as well. And lo and behold, a week and a half later, Justin Trudeau is out in Canada. And that you have a better feel for what's happening around the world than I do. But do you sense there's a lot of angst and anxiety among the populace about these, what I think are self-serving and arrogant and out-of-touch politicians?
Absolutely. And people feel it in their income. In the U.S., it was affordability. In each country, they label it different. But people in the middle of the income scale are feeling the pressure of inflation and of small businesses not getting enough capital. So I think we have to say this is socialism is on the run. President Trump comes in and identifies Kamala Harris and the Biden policies as socialists, and they're on the run. So let's have that be globally. I dream of a world where you could have actual governments, people having freedom in Cuba, in Venezuela, in Lebanon. These are countries that could hold their own weight and allow people some advancement. They're not doing it, but Trump can help.
Well, I couldn't agree more. I think it's a great point, and I hope we see more of this kind of populist revolt because I do think the governing class has lost the respect and the support of the governed, and it's about time we remove these people and put people who really care about the people they're supposed to be representing, not themselves. Now, I want to bring up one other subject, David Malpass, and that is what is happening with inflation in the United States. You touched on this a little bit earlier, but again, in our hotline this week, which I know you got, we said we're worried about inflation. We don't think the fight against inflation is over. And you're seeing creeping up in these long-term interest rates. You're seeing commodity prices starting to drift back upward. How big of a problem is this? Because I think if we see inflation when Trump comes back into office, that could really disrupt. People are sick and tired of higher prices.
They are. So affordability is going to be, a permanent. I hope it will be a permanent issue for the voters. But you can stop the inflation by more production. And so I think of it as a battle between the powers of government to slow things down. You saw it with Biden putting off limits the offshore drilling, and Trump coming in saying, I actually want businesses to be able to invest more. He can win on that, and it will bring inflation down. But it's going to take month by month by month. I'm a little worried that the mainstream media, the press, will be talking about the inflation months from now and saying it's somehow related to Trump. It's really important how the communication is done now, that we have leftover, unproductiveness from Biden all over the place. It's every dishwasher that doesn't work. And so that can be fixed, but it's you have to communicate it to the public the way Milei is doing in Argentina. He comes in and says, we've had a disaster government, and I need a 1-year honeymoon in order to fix this, and I hope we get that.
You and I think exactly alike on this. Now, one last question before I let you go. I think, by the way, you would be an outstanding next Federal Reserve Board chairman. You know more about the Fed policy than anyone. But what worries me, David, and you and I have talked about this privately, I look over there at the Fed and this kind of temple over there, and I see 300 PhD economists, almost all of whom are Keynesian and don't believe in the supply side model that you and I believe in, that you were just talking about, that increasing the supply of goods and services is a good way to bring down inflation. They seem to think the opposite, David. They think the more you produce, the more inflation you're going to get.
That's right. Growth causes inflation in their models.
It's ridiculous.
Think what we've got. These are 50-year-old models that haven't been updated. Think if you were trying to run computers with chips that were made 50 years ago. That's what you would get. It's a joke. Yeah. And that permeates the way the Fed literally thinks that its job is to control demand within the economy. It's ridiculous because they're up against regulation.
They can't control demand. The only thing they can control is the supply of money, not the demand for money.
Exactly. And the added problem right now is the government is borrowing so short term that when the Fed keeps the interest rates high, the way they're doing right now, it's the government that's spending more money. So it just digs the hole deeper and deeper. Yeah. Doesn't make any sense. We need new models, and that, I think, is going to take new people.
I couldn't agree more. David Malpass, thanks so much for taking time off on your busy Saturday afternoon. That is David Malpass, the former president of the World Bank, who was kind enough to take some time off to educate us about the economy. Folks, we'll be right back. This is the More Money Show on WABC.
This is More Money with economist Steve Moore. Now, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show on WABC, the number one talk radio show in these United States of America. And just such a privilege to be able to sit in front of this microphone every Saturday afternoon and chat with you about what is happening with our economy, our financial situation, our political situation. As I said at the outset of the show, I'm giddy right now. I truly am. I'm just so excited about what's coming for our country. And I think most of you are probably feeling the same way. A couple things I wanted to bring up that I meant to mention last week, but I just couldn't get to them. And I try to use this show as kind of a learning experience for folks about what's the real story about politics and the economy. And here's one that I find just so frustrating, and that is that the Republicans today are the earmarking party. Now, what's an earmark? For those of you who don't follow this stuff that closely, it's one of these pork barrel special interest projects that the politicians stick in these trillions of dollars of spending bills. Oftentimes they have, costs of $20, $50 million, $100 million. Some of them are $500 million for bringing home the bacon to their districts. And back when I was working with Newt Gingrich back in the mid-1990s, we finally got Republicans to start moving away from earmarks, because my old friend Tom Coburn, who was one of the great senators of all time, he died a few years ago. But Tom Coburn used to say that the earmarks were the gateway drug to run away massive multi-trillion-dollar spending bills. And he was right about that. If you stick all these special interest projects in the budget, you can get everybody to vote for them. Oh, I got this train station. I got this hot tub. I got this, fence around this, football stadium. I got a football stadium. There's a football stadium in the budget that we just passed. And so the earmarking has to stop. But here's the thing. I'm going to read this from my friend Tom Smith, who wrote a letter to President Trump. And he said that last year, more than 50 of the largest earmarkers in the House of Representatives were Republicans. In the Senate, 8 of the 12 biggest pork barrelers were Republicans. So for those of you who think I'm just a rah-rah Republican, I am not. I'm disgusted by this. I mean, come on, how can you expect to balance the budget and to be fiscal disciplinarians if you can't even control get your hand out of the candy jar, right? They can't do it. They can't stop. And so I get a lot of notes from people, and I really appreciate comments back on the show, what you like and what you don't like. And some people say, you're too damn Republican. Well, no, I'm not. I'm here to tell you, I think Republicans are a big part of the problem. I think they're the lesser of two evils, but that doesn't mean they have a big problem that they can't deal with either. And, anyone who's gone through Alcoholics Anonymous or has any kind of problem with some kind of addiction, that the first stage and step for dealing with an addiction is to admit you've got a problem. But the Republicans won't even admit that they have a problem here, and I find that to be disillusioning, to say the least. Next thing I wanted to bring up, and by the way, the stuff that I bring up every week on the show, most of this is covered in our Unleash Prosperity hotline every morning, and I want to make sure everybody's getting that. Just go to unleashprosperity.com, sign up. It is absolutely free. It's an email you'll get every morning. You've heard me say this before, but my friend Newt Gingrich, who I was just talking about, the former House of Representatives Speaker, has said that it's one of the first things he reads in the morning. And so he says, keep doing it, Steve, because I learned so much from this, and you can too. But in any case, one of our items in the last couple of days was this new report that just came out from U-Haul, which is, the leading moving van company in America. And U-Haul found that, and this isn't going to surprise anybody who is a, normal and regular listener of this show, but the 5 states with the most out migration were California, Massachusetts, New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania. I think 4 of those 5 states are all within this listening audience. I don't know if we have any stations out there in California, but these states are being ruined by progressive governance. Then I thought it was really interesting because there's been a change in these numbers in terms of where are the U-Haul trailers moving to? Where are they bringing the packages and all the clothes and all of the furniture? Where are they moving to? And here I'll go from the 5th. Most likely place to move to the first. The 5th, drum roll please, is Tennessee. And Tennessee has no income tax, so it has a big advantage. They were number 5. Number 4 this year was Florida. Florida used to be number 1, but I think so many people are moving into Florida that there's not a lot of room there left. And also they've had issues with hurricanes that I think are scaring some people off. Number 3 is North Carolina. Number 4 is Texas. And number one destination was South Carolina. And Jackson Avery, who is my producer here, hails from South Carolina. He's got a big grin on his face because he loves to see that. But these towns in South Carolina, like Charleston, are just growing like crazy because they have low taxes and good governance. So New York has a lot of work to do, and so does New Jersey. Really, I mean, this is a outrageous thing that is going on in these states. They keep raising taxes over and over and over again, and to their detriment. Wanted to raise one quick point, if I may, before we take our break. about what is happening with this tax bill, because for those of you who listen regularly, you know that Larry Kudlow and I have both been on this jihad about the fact that we have to pass one big, beautiful tax cut bill, and we have to do it right away. We cannot delay. I would like to see this thing done in the first 100 days. Trump said he'd like to see it done by Memorial Day. I'll live with that. So that means we got to get passed by mid-May. So by late May, he can have a nice, beautiful bill signing ceremony to make these tax cuts permanent. And I want to remind you, if we do not do this, then we're going to see a massive tax increase because the taxes all go up on January 1st. Now, my friend John McLaughlin, who's one of the top pollsters, and he's been on this show before, he has some of these statistics. He found that, the vast majority of people who are asked about the elements of the Trump tax cut, they approve of it. They think it's good for America. And why? Because it is. So if there's any congressmen or senators listening to the show, I have a lot of them on the show. I don't know if they're in the listening audience. Pass the tax bill as quickly as possible to get the American economy rolling again and to make America great again. This is Steve Moore. This is the More Money Show, and we'll be right back.
This is More Money with economist Steve Moore. Now, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show. We are on every Saturday afternoon on WABC and affiliated stations throughout the country. Thanks so much for joining. This is our second hour. We're on from 1 to 3. I have the privilege of following the great Larry Kudlow. And so a lot to cover today. We've got some really great guests coming on the show today to talk about what's happening with politics and the economy and finance. And so I just wanted to start the hour off by making a few points about what is going to be happening soon in this country, and that is that we are going to have inaugurated a new president. I think there will be a wave of optimism that we've seldom seen before. Even my Democratic friends are starting to say, hey, Trump's starting to make a lot of sense on some of these major issues. We have got to do the tax cut immediately. We have got to get the border secure. We've got to start producing more energy and other things. And I think all of this is going to happen. I think Trump is going to hit this thing right out of the park, although he's going to face opposition, obviously, from the Democrats in his own party. But look, free markets work. You cut taxes, good things happen. You get regulations off the back of our businesses. They hire more workers and they invest more money here. And so I look at the agenda that Trump has laid out, and I have to say I'm quite excited about this, as I think most of you are. I wanted to mention a few things. First of all, I wanted to do a shout out to a couple of good friends who have worked with me over the years at Unleash Prosperity, which is the group that I run. And by the way, if you don't get the Unleash Prosperity hotline, I don't know why you wouldn't get it, because it's absolutely free. All you have to do is go to unleashprosperity.com, sign up for the daily hotline, and we will send it to you 5 mornings a week, and you will then be the smartest person in the room when you read this. Take 5 or 6 minutes when you have your cup of coffee, read the hotline, get educated, because we have a lot of great people who put that together. I'm proud to be part of it, but boy, what a great team we have. And speaking of a great team, I just wanted to say that 2 or 3 of my top people who work with me are moving on into the Trump administration. And I just wanted to do a shout out to them because I'm so proud of them. One of them is the great Alexandra Priate, who is really the person who first introduced me to John Catsimatidis. And then John Catsimatidis was kind enough to give me this show, which is really the most fun I have all week, is being in front of this microphone and talking to you. But Alexandra is just a superstar. She's going to be working basically as not the chief of staff, but the person who's going to run the Treasury Department and run the life of Scott Bessent as the Treasury Secretary. And I can't think of anybody better than Alexandra do that, although I think she's a traitor for leaving me. Just joking, of course. No, I told her she's got to do this. She's got to serve the country. And Scott Bessent is going to be a great Treasury Secretary, and Alexandra Priate is going to be a wonderful special assistant to Scott Bessent, but we hate to lose her. And then my friend Casey Mulligan, who's been on this show many times and is one of the top economists in the country, and he's been one of our special assistants at the Unleash Prosperity Group, is now moving into the Trump White House to become essentially the deregulation czar, the one who's going to judge whether these regulations, when Congress or the agencies pass them, do they pass muster? Will their benefits outweigh the costs? And in many, many cases, if not most cases, these regulations have a higher cost on society than they do benefits. And in that case, we should get rid of them. We should get rid of these regulations. And Casey is going to identify the hundreds and hundreds of regulations that impose giant costs on our economy with very little benefit. And so that is a wonderful thing. And so I'm proud of them, as well as the whole team, for really making the Unleash Prosperity group such a success and providing the great advice to the incoming Trump administration about how to handle our economy. And we'll be right beside him, folks. That's what's so exciting. You know, we even those of us who are staying behind, and I'm not going to go into the administration. I love Donald Trump, and I do just about anything that he asked me to do. But I told him I thought I could be of more benefit to him, you know, using my platform here at WABC and on Fox News and other things, and talking about him and providing strategic advice when I can, because I love that man. And I think he's been so good to me, by the way. Trump is not just a great man. He's a good man. I consider him to be a gem of a friend. And that's unusual in politicians. But so it's going to be an exciting period. And as I always say, buckle up, put on your seatbelt, because we're going to fly right out of the gates with an incredibly ambitious pro-growth agenda. Now, speaking of ambitious and pro-growth agendas, I wanted to mention that one of the things that's happening in the states around the country, and, you know, the Republicans control almost half of the state legislatures, both the House and Senate. I think Democrats only have, I think the number is around 15, 16, or 17. So Republicans not only have an advantage in Washington, but they have an advantage in most state capitals, though not New York, not New Jersey, not Connecticut, not Rhode Island, but outside of the Northeast, most of them are either split power or Republican power. And so you're seeing this kind of tax cutting revolution going on in these states. So, for example, last year we had New Hampshire get rid of their entire income tax, their personal income tax, their dividend. Now, they didn't have a personal income tax, but they got rid of the dividend tax, the capital gains tax, et cetera. And so welcome New Hampshire to being the one island of economic sanity in the Northeast in a sea of craziness. And so if you want to move to a place that has low costs, but you don't want to move to Florida or Texas, go to the great state of New Hampshire, which is run, by the way, by a great governor, Chris Sununu, who has done an amazing job revising that state. But then you also have Louisiana, North Carolina, and other states that are moving towards a flat tax. It was something I'd like to see for the United States government. And so if you add them all together, I'm just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9, 10, 11, 12. You have about 25 to 28 states now that either have a no income tax or a low flat rate income tax. That is a wonderful and promising development that I can't tell you how excited I am about. The other thing I wanted to mention before we get to our guests is this story that we covered in our hotline the other day, which is that the number of states that have high minimum wages is very significant. And so the minimum, look, I'm not against a minimum wage, but I am against the idea of very high minimum wages that price low income workers out of a job. You know, my first job, I made $2.25 an hour. That was the minimum wage back then. But you know what? You learn a lot on your first job. You really do. I bet everybody listening to the show can remember the first paid job you ever had. And it's a fantastic thing to be able to have a job and feel productive and learn skills. And you can't have a good second job until you have a first job. And we do not do a service to our young workers by pricing them out of the labor market with a high minimum wage. In fact, I think of that first employer I had where I worked in a warehouse. I feel like I should go back and pay him money because I got real training. I learned more on that job than I did from a classroom. And so we've got to make sure that if we're going to have a minimum wage, we're going to provide why not a teenage minimum wage? Why not a teenage minimum wage of maybe $5 or $6 an hour so that these young people, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19 years old can get some training, can get some job skills, show up for work. That will pay lifetime dividends, and it's much more money than much more beneficial to them than maybe the $5 or $6 an hour they're making, because you've got to get people acculturated to working. And when you're working, you're happy. And when you're doing nothing, you're sitting around, probably doing drugs, drinking, doing a criminal activity. As my great, wonderful mom used to say, idle hands are the devil's workshop. And that is so true. So, let's have a minimum wage, but let's make sure we're not pricing young people and unskilled people out of the workforce where they cannot work at all. Folks, we will be right back. Have a wonderful hour ahead with a number of great guests, and we will be back in exactly 60 seconds on the More Money Show on WABC.
It's More Money with leading economist Steve Moore. Now, here's your host, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show. I hope everybody is having a wonderful weekend. By the way, next weekend is going to be incredibly wonderful because we are inaugurating a new president, and that will be Donald J. Trump. And so I'm quite excited about that. I will be there watching the incredible festivities that will be going on that Monday morning and all day. And I don't know if I'm going to go to the balls. I don't know if my wife really wants to. She wants to get all dressed up and wear the beautiful gown and so on. But I'm wondering about that because, my God, the amount of security for this is going to be incredible. But I want to bring on John Fund, who you all know. John Fund, he's a regular on the show. He's a regular on Fox News. You know him from his many, many years at the Wall Street Journal. John and I are so old that we both go back to the Reagan era. That's how old we are. John, thanks for joining. By the way, he is now senior editor and contributor at National Review. He also works with me doing our election and political analysis at Unleash Prosperity, and is also with National Review. So he wears many hats. John, thanks for joining.
A pleasure as always. Happy New Year.
Okay, so I've been chopping at the bit to talk to you about this, John, and I thought you were the best person I could think of to have this discussion with about what I am calling, John, I hope you're sitting down, the death of wokeism. And I think all these ESG stuff, all of the stuff about equity and diversity, and I think people are sick of it. I think the companies are running away from it. I think the voters are saying, and the consumers are saying, we don't want that. We want a country that is unified, not judges people by the color of their skin, and not everybody in this country is a victim. And we're seeing so many signs of this, John, and I want to know what you make of it.
Well, I would slightly rephrase that. I don't think we're seeing the death of wokeism, because that implies, it's going to be put under the ground and dirt is going to be put on top of it. I do think we're seeing the return of meritocracy. And what that means is the traditional American values where you work hard, you demonstrate talent, you get rewarded for it, and you get to keep more of the fruits of your labor. That is coming back in a big way. Mm-hmm. Extreme wokeism, yes, that is going to have a funeral because, A, it doesn't work, B, it's become revealed as a complete scam. Everybody from Robin DiAngelo to Ta'ishi Coates has been exposed as basically a con artist. And in addition, of course, we're seeing that putting people's identity ahead of people's ability creates all kinds of problems. Every time there's a major... John, it's un-American. That's not what America's about. We don't judge people by the color of their skin. We judge them by what they do. So for a long time. Look, what happened is we've had a troubled past, and then we decided to flip it completely over and go in a completely different direction. Yeah. And the victims changed, but the policy, of course, the misguided policy remained. Every time we have a major tragedy or governmental screw-up or even corporate screw-up, people ask in the back of their minds, were the wrong people in charge and were the wrong priorities being emphasized rather than what we know needs to be done to protect people's prosperity, lives, and property.
Yes.
And I'll tell you, it even goes, people are asking that about the fires in Los Angeles now. People have been asking that about, the Boeing scandal. People have been asking that about almost everything that goes on. It may or may not be true, but the fact that people are questioning these things says the policies have gone too far, and we need to have a course correction.
Well, there's so many tangents to what you just said, but one of them that I wanted to explore with you is what's going on with Mark Zuckerberg over there at Facebook and Meta, who 5 years ago was kind of one of the leaders of this kind of DEI, ESG, movement. And for those who don't know what these acronyms are, DEI is what? Diversity, equity, and inclusion, is it?
Yes.
And then what is ESG?
Environmental, social, governance.
Yeah. And so what I call a kind of an extreme environmental view of, by the way, we saw a lot of companies, John, just this week walking away from net zero. Tell my listeners what that is.
Well, net zero is the completely misguided concept that whether it's by 2050 or by 2040 or by 2035, we have to achieve either in specific industries or system-wide, countrywide, a system where no more carbon is emitted than in the past. In other words, we basically keep the emissions of carbon constant. They don't grow.
And so this basically means no oil, no gas, no coal, and we're going to be able to supposedly fund a $26 trillion industrial economy with, windmills and solar panels?
Well, it was never realistic, but let's just say progressives are great at setting goals, not so great at figuring out how to reach them. So the goal itself, of course, was completely flawed, and the implementation, until very recently, California was going to stop selling gas-powered cars in 2030, which is only 5 years away. Preposterous. They've now extended that to 2035. That's preposterous, too. So we're going to be chasing that tail for a long time.
So we just have a news flash about what's going on in California. It looks tragic and just awful what's happening with these fires in the Los Angeles area. California. You grew up in California. Why is this happening? Could these fires have been avoided?
Well, let's concede for purposes of discussion something that is still very controversial, that climate change is leading to longer periods of warm weather and therefore increasing what is called fire weather that's susceptible to fire. Let's just concede that for purposes of discussion. That doesn't mean that there aren't much bigger aspects to the story. California, and in fact, frankly, most of the rest of the country, has had horrible fire management policies for decades. These are driven by environmental considerations. The federal level, the state level, the local level basically means when fires break out, and 80% of forest fires are man-made, the 20% are caused by lightning and other considerations. When they break out, the goal is to stop them immediately and quickly. Well, all well and good, but what that means is that it builds up an enormous amount of brush and other flammable material, and it's not cleared out because of the state of nature ideology that says we leave nature the way that it is. Well, what that means is you're going to have constant kindling for future fires. Now,
so, John, isn't this sort of, I've heard this term out on the West Coast called "let it burn"? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, but then of course you don't properly clear out the flammable material for the next fire, which means the next fire is even bigger. Now, Los Angeles has compounded that by this. They have water policies, which basically mean a lot of their water goes right into the Pacific Ocean because there's not proper drainage and storage facilities created. Yeah. What happened in Los Angeles is one of the reservoirs was not properly refilled. The fire occurred, and the former commissioner of Power and Light in Los Angeles says, I've been in neighborhoods, my neighborhood, Pacific Palisades, the fire hydrants are empty, they're dry. So the firefighters stand around and they watch the fire consume the houses. And
that's dangerous. I mean, that's total incompetence.
By the way, this is exactly what happened in the Maui fires in Hawaii 2 years ago.
Yeah.
There was not enough water storage, and there were critical decisions made by officials not to release the water, and of course the entire historic village of Lahaina was destroyed.
Well, one thing that's kind of really sadly ironic about this is that for those who are concerned about climate change and carbon emissions, these fires that have been happening in Canada and California and Montana, they emit way more carbon into the atmosphere than all the automobiles in North America. So you would think that if you were concerned about climate change and carbon emissions, you would want to put these fires out as quickly as you could.
Well, again, that's the goal. But if you have bad water policies and you leave the brush after and the flammable material there, you're going to have even a worse fire later because you put out the fire, but there's a buildup of material at that point, especially if trees have gone and it's replaced by chaparral and other highly flammable material. It only makes matters worse.
So returning to that, thank you for that update about what's going on in California. Returning to this issue of the death, or hopefully the near death of ESG and DEI, we've seen so many developments this week, including something you wrote about, which is this new this declaration that Mark Zuckerberg made, saying we're not going to censor speech anymore on Facebook and some of these other social media platforms that are owned by Meta. And if he's right if he's genuine in that, that's a major breakthrough.
Oh, I think it's dramatic. And the reason is we have seen over the last 10 years the rise of an entire industry called fact-checking. In other words, any time that a politician or someone in the news says something, an army of establishment media fact-checkers come, but rather than report the facts, which they often cherry-pick, they do something which I would call supporting the existing narrative. In other words, whatever the party line is, whatever the woke line is, they supply the facts that back that up. And what that has meant in practice for social media users is their posts are removed, their posts are de-emphasized, so they don't get enough much prominence as before. Some people, their posts are allowed to stay up, but they are not allowed to monetize to get any money from the clicks or the popularity of them. Now, of course, there are abuses. There will always be abuses. There will always be people who make stuff up and put it up on the web. But allowing private companies to be bullied or forced into hiring an army of fact-checkers is counterproductive, and it's because it restricts free speech. And even worse than that, we saw during COVID that government officials, this is all documented, government officials would go to or suggest to social media companies, we don't like what people are saying about COVID. We don't like what people are saying about lockdowns. We don't like what people are saying about, perhaps not taking the COVID vaccines. There have been some problems that have resulted from that. Well, shut those people down. And the companies didn't because, of course, government regulates the Internet now. Government regulates the forms of communication, and it's a dangerous, dangerous precedent for a free country.
It really is. And, look, this is America. We should have, one of our most fundamental rights. It's in the First Amendment. There's a reason it's the First Amendment, is the right to free speech. And you and I, and I bet a lot of our listeners have been the victims of these, quote, fact checkers who don't get their facts right, John. And they're, censoring people with views that are conservative, and liberals get a free pass.
Well, of course, in theory, it can happen to anyone, and that's why you want to make sure that it doesn't happen to everyone.
Right, exactly.
And the only way to do that is to do what Zuckerberg has done. He's saying, look, content moderation can be done. Most of it can be done by the users. They post community notes right underneath the offending tweet or the offending message or the offending video. They say, these facts are wrong. Here are links to prove that they're wrong. And of course, outright appeals to violence or racism or complete insanity, you can do something about the extreme cases. But what Zuckerberg is saying is, absent emergency situations or an appeal to violence or something like that, we're going to let the community police itself.
Yeah. I am so excited about this because, what I hope, John, and this, we only got about 35 seconds left, but, I'm worried about the censors of big government. In other words, I'm less worried about big tech than I am big government stepping in and, putting a sock in my mouth so I can't say what I want to say.
Oh, I agree. But almost as bad is the collusion of big government leaning on big tech, basically saying, nice little platform you have here, would be a shame if something happened to it.
Yeah. Well, John, great points. Thanks for joining us, folks. That was John Fund from National Review, formerly many, many years with the Wall Street Journal editorial board, works with me at Unleash Prosperity, and is one of the smartest political people I know. Folks, we'll be right back. This is the More Money Show on WABC.
It's More Money with leading economist Steve Moore. Now, here's your host, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show on WABC. Now I want to get to our policy and politics section that we do every week, and I've got two of the smartest guys around to talk about that. John McLaughlin, who is one of the nation's premier pollsters. He did much of the polling for the Trump campaign in recent campaigns. And so, John, thanks for joining. And then Phil Kerpen, who is the president of American Commitment. He also works with me putting together the daily hotline that is put out by Unleash Prosperity. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining. I wanted to start with you, John McLaughlin, because you have been circulating this interesting poll that you did not too long ago about what Americans think about the Trump tax cut. And I was surprised at some of these numbers. People are very supportive of Trump's ideas.
Absolutely. I mean, and I can tell you from, working, President Trump as well as anyone, you, Larry Kudlow, Art Laffer, Steve Forbes, you guys know him, and you deal with the substance side, the policy side. I deal with polling in the political side, so I deal with the substance abuse side. But his gut instinct when he decided to do the tax cuts was exactly right, because we asked in a poll that we took in December 17th, we posted it online, McLaughlinOnline.com. It was 1,000 voters across the country, and it was modeled after this recent turnout of the election on November 5th. And when we asked them, did they favor or oppose no tax on tips, 71-21, all voters support.
Wow.
64% among Democrats.
By the way, are these registered who are the people you polled? Registered voters or
registered voters who are likely to vote in the midterm elections.
And this was a national poll.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. 1,000 voters, replicated the turnout on November 5th by party, race, age, demographics, education, et cetera. But we screened them. How likely are you to vote in the elections in November of 2026 for Congress and Senate? And so these voters overwhelmingly want no tax on tips, and that included 64% of the Democrats. No tax on overtime, 66-25, they support that, including 59% of the Democrats. No tax on Social Security, they supported 82-11, 72% among the Democrats. And do you want to make, the Trump tax cuts permanent? They support that 70-17, including 58% of the Democrats.
That's amazing. Even when you tell people it's the Trump tax cut, because, so many people just don't like Trump. They like the Trump policy.
Right. Well, we call it the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act.
Right.
So, but still, they know they love tax cuts. They're pro-growth. They want the economy to expand. By the way, the top issue in the survey is still inflation, and most Americans think the economy is getting worse, not better. 55-37, 84% negatively impacted by inflation, 48% to the point where they can't afford basic necessities. They say the country's on the wrong track, 66-24. So the election hasn't solved anything. It's just given us an opportunity, and they're telling us what they want.
So that's a nice lead in to Phil Kerpen. The reason I wanted to have him on is talk about these economic issues. Phil, just anecdotally, I'm hearing kind of the same thing. People are worried about what's going to happen with the election. People are worried. You edit the outline. We had something about how inflation, we have not conquered the inflation problem, Phil. And in my opinion, if Trump doesn't get inflation under control, and he's going to need the Fed to help him on that, this euphoria that people are facing is going to turn to bitter disappointment.
Yeah, I think Trump is actually coming into office at a very challenging time economically. A lot of the indicators that had been improving have now softened, and there have been some negative revisions, particularly in the employment numbers. And you're right. I mean, the inflation outlook is at best mixed right now. A lot of the indicators that we like to look at are starting to accelerate again. And, this is, I think, the real danger. There's sort of a double danger if they don't get the tax bill done relatively early in the year. One is the economic harm that'll come from that. Even if they end up doing it by the end of the year, the uncertainty and the overhang of, are we going to have this multi-trillion-dollar tax hike hitting us at the end of the year is going to prevent a lot of economic activity. It's going to increase anxiety at a time where there's already a lot of anxiety. And even if they get it done, if it's late in the year, we're unlikely to see the economic bang from that in time for the midterm elections. And so it really needs to get done early in the year so we get the economic benefits and so the Republicans can also get credit as a political matter in time for the election for people to really feel the benefit. So I really like that Trump said he needs this on his desk before Memorial Day. I think that's very reasonable given the amount of political capital that he has right now if he leans into this to get this done. And that should give us enough time to see the economic benefits, ahead of the elections next year and Republicans campaign on, this is what we did for you.
Well put. So, John McLaughlin, Phil touched on something that worries me a little bit, which is, it's a good thing because your poll, I think, as I read your numbers, that Trump does have a nice wave of popular support, more so than maybe any time since he started running for president back in late 2015. And yet, as you know, political capital can come and can go. It goes through peaks and valleys. And I want him to capitalize on this political capital to get these things done as quickly as possible. And yet these senators in the Republican Senate, they're slow as molasses, as my mom used to say.
Right. And you're exactly right, because those of us who are old enough to remember, I used to work for Arthur Finkelstein, who worked for Reagan. The tax cuts passed, but they didn't go into effect until 1983. In the midterms in 82, we lost 26 House members. Republicans can't afford to lose 26 House members. Yeah. Going back to Trump's first term, when I was polling for him back then, I said to him, why did you do health care first? Because that's like Stalingrad. I said, you need to do tax cuts. And he told me that, McConnell and Ryan had told him he needed the savings from the health care. And I was like, that's our money. You need to do tax cuts. So he did the tax cuts. It passed in December of 2017, too late to help us with the 18 midterms. And we lost both the House and the Senate, and we got impeached. So let me tell you, John Thune, who I polled for, if Thune wants to be the minority Senate leader, he can slow this down, and he'll be the minority Senate leader, because 20 will be up on 33, and the House will be toast in the House.
So I want to change the subject for a minute. We have John McLaughlin, the premier pollster in this country, the one I listen to most often, and Phil Kerpen, who is a sidekick of mine at Unleash Prosperity. He runs the group American Commitment. And he also became, one of the world's experts on COVID. And right from the start, Phil had the story right. And I bring that up for two reasons, Phil. One is we have this these new strains of virus, which I guess we used to call the flu. And I'm seeing all these reports about states having, new mask laws and this and that. Are those how concerned should people be about the flu this year? And do we need to have mask requirements? Do we need to shut down schools? What are these guys going to do?
Well, we've had kind of a different respiratory virus season this year, as opposed to what we've had the last few years, in that we have a lot of flu activity right now. We have a lot of RSV activity. We still have very low coronavirus activity. So this is really like...
Oh, so hold on. So you're saying that this flu that people are experiencing, because my wife was sick for, almost a week.
It's probably an actual flu.
It's not COVID.
It's probably an actual influenza virus. More
likely.
Okay. I mean, there's still some coronavirus circulating, but this is the first winter in years where the dominant virus is not the coronavirus. It's really, there's a lot of RSV and there's a lot of flu A right now that's going around. The good news is those have both peaked. They both peaked, it looks like, about last week.
Oh, good.
And so, we're hoping it'll taper off quickly. Masking is a quasi-religious ritual now for people, particularly on the political left in California and New York and some other places. But the evidence is very clear that it's not effective for preventing the spread of respiratory viruses. And in fact, it may be counterproductive in some cases, because if you have somebody who feels sick and they think, I can go out and meet and mingle with people because I'm going to put a mask on, they're really doing the people that they interact with a disservice when they should be staying home. And this is one of the things that I hope when Trump's people get in and Dave Weldon takes over the CDC and he gets maybe RFK in at HHS, I hope they can fix all of these recommendations and everything on the CDC site to actually be evidence-based instead of still having all the stuff about masks on there.
So, Phil, before I turn it back to John McLaughlin, I've been getting some emails from folks about the possibility of a pardon for Anthony Fauci. I think he's one of the great villains of our time. I don't believe there has been a pardon yet, but do you think he should get a pardon? And do you think it's coming?
Definitely not. He should not. And I don't think he will, just because I think that he wants to claim he did nothing wrong, and they don't really think Trump's going to prosecute him. But, I mean, the guy committed perjury. There's no question about it. Multiple occasions he perjured himself. It's pretty clear at this point that he was using U.S. taxpayer dollars to fund virus research activities at the Wuhan Institute of Virology that may or may not have been related to the origin of the virus. We may never know that definitively because of all the evidence that was destroyed, but he no doubt went into panic mode and repeatedly lied about his role in that. And I think that's a lot of why our response was so panicked and really thought out. And so he's a bad guy, should not be pardoned. But if Biden actually pardons him, that'll sort of be a confession of sorts, right? So that would be interesting.
That's true. One quick bit, just in 30 seconds, Phil. We've got a new national health team coming in place. Some of these people are people you've worked with. It seems like it's a pretty good public health team that Trump has assembled.
Yeah, I'm really optimistic about them. I think Marty Makary is going to be excellent at FDA. He's one of the only ones, when there was this question about does getting infected with the virus confer immunity, there were all these debates about whether it does. He ran the study. That showed it does. And you need people who are actually willing to answer these important questions with evidence. So having someone who's focused on facts and evidence taking over FDA is great. And I'm really excited about Jay Bhattacharya as the nominee for NIH. Jay is someone that we worked with pretty closely, and actually he co-signed the amicus brief that my group did to the Supreme Court in the vaccine mandate case, which was actually mentioned at oral argument and I think had a pretty good impact. And so Jay is absolutely top-notch. And the thing about him that's amazing, it's like a goal for me to someday be as even-tempered as he is. I mean, he was targeted for all kinds of over-the-top personal invective and hatred. Yeah. And they said, we're going to all of it. But he never responded in kind. He was always fair and charitable to his critics.
He was.
Really, really.
Well, let me just. Yeah, I agree with you. He's a great guy, and I think he's so professionally able to do this job. A great pick. John McLaughlin, swinging it back to you. Donald Trump has made some comments about Panama Canal and taking over Greenland, and Canada being the 51st state. And what do you think about that? He's been, a lot of conservatives like what he's saying, but the media seems to be blasting him for this. What's your take on all this?
I think he's talking about American security. I mean, when you put it all together, we're facing threats from Russia and China. That's why Greenland's important. Plus, they might have the rare earth minerals up there. Panama Canal, it's an unreported story, but you've got the Chinese at both ends of the Panama Canal. They could shut it down. Yeah. We could never get aircraft carriers or military ships through our own canal that we built sacrificed American lives. And then when you talk about.
By the way, is his policy, John? Hold on just a sec. Is that policy that he's proposed? I don't exactly know what he's proposing with the Panama Canal, but you're right. Why should Chinese ships have access to the canal over American ships when we built the canal?
Right, and also the cost. What he's talking about is that Panama is overcharging the United States. So Donald Trump's a businessman and he's negotiating, but it's not just economic, it's our security. And China's got a military base in Cuba. All this is going on while Joe Biden's been asleep. And Trump, Canada is our closest ally in the North, but they rely on us to defend them. And, so right now we live in a dangerous world, and Russia is they're in a 3-year war with Ukraine, and China is talking about taking over Taiwan, which is why if they shut down the canal, we got a problem. So there's, Donald Trump is talking about making the United States safe and secure again. That was one of his mandates from the people why he won. And that's what he's doing. So he's got health care like Phil's talking about. Phil was great after the 2020 election, what he's done. And, you're talking about tax cuts. Trump's got the whole package. I mean, he's got a lot of problems he's going to fix.
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. That one last question, our last 30 seconds to you, John McLaughlin. Joe Biden mercifully is going to be leaving the White House in a week. What do you think his legacy will be? What do the American people think of Joe Biden at this point?
He's the worst president in our lifetimes. I mean, he makes Jimmy Carter
even worse than Jimmy Carter.
Jimmy Carter was a decent man. He was a failed president. I mean, he gave away the canal, and that's why he lost. But Biden's corrupt. He's a failure. He's leaving. He's leaving a weak economy. He's leaving us vulnerable to terrorists and our enemies, existential enemies. And we've never seen an open border like this and the crime like we've seen in the country. So he's just history needs to properly put him in perspective and think about the corruption where he had to pardon his own son to protect himself and the rest of his family.
Yeah, that's so true. Well, relief is coming, folks. We got a reliever coming in. We got Mariano Rivera coming in to make our country great again. And Phil Kerpen and John McLaughlin, thank you so much. And folks, this is the More Money Show. We'll be right back.
It's More Money with leading economist Steve Moore. Now, here's your host, Steve Moore.
Well, folks, that is our show for today. This is the More Money Show. It's been wonderful to be with you as always. One parting thought. Next week, at the for those of you coming to the inaugurations, we are printing up red shirts with white lettering that say on the T-shirt, "Welcome back." And these are for Donald Trump, and we're going to be having these all over the Capitol area so people can wear the T-shirts. If you agree with me that we want to say welcome back to Donald Trump, we're going to have a big, big banner right in front of the White House that says, "Welcome back, Mr. President." It is an exciting period. Big change is coming. Good things are coming for the country. I can feel it. I know you can too. And have a great weekend. And we'll be talking next weekend. Inauguration week 2025 is right around the corner.